Hello, I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley.
And I'm her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Heidi and I want to welcome you to Open to Hope Conversations, the podcast.
We believe that the greatest gift you can give yourself after a loss is hope, using this moment to connect with others who have not only survived but thrived.
So let's get started. Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we're going to have a great and very interesting show today, and it's a show that's meaningful to me, and I've learned a lot from just preparing for the show for our guest. But before we get started, I wanted to tell people that our book, Open to Love, The Secrets of Senior Dating, written by Dr. Frank Powers and me, is now available on Amazon. Our book's filled with tips and tools for those of you like me who are looking for companionship as an antidote to loneliness, which is the #1 mental health issue for seniors. All of the proceeds for this book go to the Open to Hope Foundation with a mission of helping people find hope after loss. Well, Heidi, we've got, as I said, an interesting show today. We're going to be talking about Empowered Endings Foundation, which is very interesting, and introduce our guests. I can't wait to get into this topic because it's powerful.
Okay, Mom, we're going to be talking today with Dr. Bob Uslander, and he and his wife, Elizabeth Uslander, who is a grief counselor, co-founded Empowered Endings, which is a unique palliative and end-of-life care model. Dr. Bob received his medical degree from the UCLA Geffen School of Medicine, where he was inducted into the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society. He has practiced medicine in emergency, palliative, and end-of-life care for over 30 years. Welcome to our podcast, Dr. Bob.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. Now tell me, how did you get into the end-of-life care area?
Oh, it was a bit of a circuitous path. I mean, I was an emergency physician for 25 years, and as an emergency physician, you are faced with the end of life frequently, and it's a different approach to end of life. As an ER doctor, as you can imagine, our task is to save lives, extend life, and almost at any cost. We often were resuscitating people and trying to bring people back, even when it didn't make any sense. You know, there wasn't any hope for any quality of life, but you're trained to do what you're trained to do. And especially back in the 80s, when I was in my training in the 90s, there wasn't much attention being placed on quality of life and whether bringing a person back was the right thing to do. Over time, I started to question that model and question that approach, and it kind of led me to some deeper explorations. I had an experience back in 2001 when a good friend of mine died from melanoma at the age of 32. And I had my initial exposure to hospice care, and what a beautiful thing that was. And I learned that death doesn't have to be traumatic, and it doesn't have to be scary and horrific, as it always appears to be in the hospital and on television. So in 2013, I transitioned from emergency medicine into palliative care and started going to people's homes and helping to identify the challenges that they were experiencing and guide and support them in having a better quality of life. I was also working in the hospice arena, and I became very discouraged and dismayed at the gaps that people were finding themselves in, and unable to get the support and the care that they needed to avoid a lot of the struggling that they were still having, even though they were under hospice care. And because hospice is a insurance benefit, there's limitations and constraints as to what can be offered to people. So I started.
There are more constraints on hospice now. When it very first started back in the 80s, I mean, it was kind of freewheeling. Everybody could take care of everybody and all, and now it's got rules and restrictions and it's become much tougher.
Much different. It's a much different animal than it was back in its formative years, for sure. And there's value in hospice. It's important to understand from that my perspective is the people that go into hospice care, the support that's offered is highly valuable, and it's a highly variable in terms of the quality of care that can and is offered, and it's limited because they can only deliver they have limitations and regulations, and so people often need more, and the healthcare system has been slow to recognize that. So in 2016, I started a private in-home palliative and end-of-life care model. It was initially called Integrated MD Care, and it's morphed into what is now Empowered Endings. My practice is really designed to create a village of support around people at the end of life, meeting them where they're at and giving them what they need to accomplish their goals and achieve their wishes.
Okay, so I know you have a lot going on. You have different things. Your wife, Elizabeth, is a social worker, and she's involved in helping survivors of the families also, right?
So
right?
yeah, we do quite a bit. We have a medical practice, the Empowered Endings Medical Group, which provides hands-on in-home care for patients and support for families. And we have an educational institute that is just it's really being created and ready to launch soon in the next couple of months to provide more education and training around optimal end-of-life care. We also do a lot of counseling, and you mentioned counseling for people who have experienced a loss.
Right.
So we have grief counselors, social workers, and people who are very highly trained and experienced in providing support both for patients and families who are anticipating a loss or have experienced significant challenges. And we also provide grief counseling and support for people who have already experienced a loss.
I like this, Dr. Bob, because you're creating a village of support, which is what my father-in-law got at the end of his life through hospice. But what happened for us is that once he died, everybody left.
Right.
And there we were, a grieving family, and we were used to having people in the house with nobody there. So I like that you've got services also to follow people after they've lost somebody.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. We're willing to provide support for anybody who is seeking it.
Mhm.
We often provide support for people who have already established a relationship with us
Mm.
because we're caring for one of their loved ones. So they already have a relationship with the grief counselor and our team. So after their loved one dies, it's not having they don't have to meet a new person to find
I
somebody who
love
they
this.
can establish a connection with at that time. Though it's a person who knows the circumstances around which their loved one passed and had already identified any, you know, challenging family dynamics or struggles that happened, so they can kind of hit the ground running on the bereavement support. We
That's a
also,
really invaluable service
yeah,
that I've actually never heard of before.
it's it's pretty dramatic. It's pretty remarkable. We have a foundation as well. So we have the Empowered Endings Foundation, which is also runs a bereavement support group for people who have supported loved ones through the medical aid and dying process.
Mhm.
And we also provide financial resources for people who can't afford some of the care that they need.
That's an invaluable service also.
One of the challenges that exists throughout healthcare. People have to tell their story over and
Yeah.
over and over. And I imagine it feels very depersonalizing
Mm.
and overwhelming to have to keep sort of, in some cases, reliving. It's not just
Yeah.
retelling, it's reliving the story so that people understand where the trauma comes from or where the struggles
Mhm.
come from. So that is a really valuable aspect of the longitudinal continuity that we offer.
You had a good friend die from melanoma,
Right.
young. I mean,
Yep.
32, unbelievable, really heartbreaking. What helped you?
What helped me was being part of the community that I had been kind of enmeshed in. One of the things that was fascinating about that experience was he died 3 days after 9/11.
Wow.
So he had been in this decline, and over the last week of his life he was pretty much bedridden and increasingly uncomfortable. And he had asked me to promise that I wouldn't allow him to suffer, and that we would comfort him in whatever way was necessary. I didn't know anything about how to comfort somebody at the end of life. I was fortunate that a friend of mine was the medical director of the hospice in this small town that we lived in. So he provided guidance, and we just created this beautiful little village of
Mhm.
his wife. He had 3 boys that were under the age of 6, and so there were a lot of other families who were close, and his best friends. So we created a little village that honored him and celebrated him. And after he died, we were in this little cocoon, in a way, sort of sheltered from the what was happening out in the world, all the madness that
Mhm.
was going on after 9/11. And then and then pretty shortly after that, we started a foundation in his name that I helped his wife create. And so there was movement to honor him. There was always movement to honor him and his life. And I think the thing that comforted me the most is that I was able to make sure that he didn't suffer.
I love what you're saying, Dr. Bob, because I feel like this early experience for you has really informed the work that you've done because you've been on both sides.
Yeah, there's no question. And I've also helped my parents. Both of my parents died a handful of years ago, and I was on both sides then as well. I was
Mhm.
helping to guide their care and ensure that they had what they needed, but I was also a son, kind of anticipating and then grieving the loss of my parents. Um, I, I'd like to share something that I feel is important, about one of the aspects of our work that we kind of alluded to, and that's the medical aid in dying. In California and 10 other states and jurisdictions, a person who is terminally ill and competent to make decisions can go through a relatively straightforward process to get access to a prescription for medication. And if they choose to take it, it's their choice. They're not obligated to or required to. If they opt to take the medication, we're usually there with our team to support them and their family. They go to sleep within 5 minutes and die peacefully within a matter of hours. And
Wow.
so this is people who are dying from cancer, from heart disease, from neurologic conditions. And the remarkable thing that often happens in this process is that the loved ones, sometimes they're reluctant to support them, sometimes they're uncomfortable with the notion, and they require counseling and guidance, and almost universally they're able to find a way to accept accept and then completely support their loved one in making this choice, because they know that the loved one is suffering, and this is the way out of that suffering. Um, and when people can make that shift and offer that gift to their loved ones, to not fight it, to not make them feel bad or guilty about making this choice, that is so empowering. And it is such a dramatic um, shift in what the grief might otherwise look like, because
Mhm.
they're giving their loved one the final gift, the gift of freedom, the gift of freedom to choose their path and have the soft landing that that they deserve. We've had the honor of supporting a handful of patients diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease who are early enough in the course of it that they're still able to make decisions, and they've chosen to stop eating and drinking and allow their life to come to a gentle and dignified end. What we've discovered through this model and through the years of our experience is that the patients often get what they need, but they die. At some point, they die.
Right.
And how they die, what happens leading up to that has such a dramatic impact on the loved ones left behind. And if we can help to soothe their fears, reduce their overwhelm, alleviate some of the anger, facilitate healing, we are giving an amazing gift. And that's something that the effects of which will be felt for decades.
Tell us how people can find you and what you would like them to know.
So we have a really well designed and constantly improving website with lots of information, and that's empoweredendings.com. And that has information about the medical practice, the educational institute, and the foundation. So anybody who's looking to contribute and support an organization that is really trying to make a huge impact on improving the way people die, we would welcome that. You can reach out to us at info@empoweredendings.com if you are interested in connecting. We're ready to launch an online community of like-minded people to kind of build this tribe, and that's going to be happening. So if somebody goes to the website and they can download the ebook exploring the end-of-life options and get on our kind of newsletter list, they'll be able to receive information about the community as it's building and the educational opportunities that are coming. Yeah, I think that's the best way. And then of course we've got social media and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, so that everybody out there is kept abreast of what's developing with Empowered Endings.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you
Nice.
for being on the show today. And we certainly will keep an eye on your organization and what's going on. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciated this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bob, and thank you so much for empowering people at the end of their lives and giving them options and telling them what their options are. Because oftentimes, towards the end of the life, people think that everybody else is making decisions for them. And I love that you're giving people power and empowering them.
Thank you again for being on the show today. And thanks everybody for watching us on the show today and for joining us. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
I'm Dr. Heidi Horsley. You have been listening to Open to Hope, the podcast. You can follow Open to Hope on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. To learn more, visit us at opentohope.com and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe.
I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. Join us again next week for another Open to Hope conversation, where we invite you to lean on our hope until you find your own.